You're listening to Bedroom Beethovens, where notable music makers break down stories accompanied by songs and melodies documenting growth through their 10,000-hour journey. And me? Well, my name is Cello, your host.
I am a bedroom Beethoven.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 140 of the podcast.
Yeah, so we got this thing here, yeah, Braille Brissy in the place like this. The IV defines
My guest this week is
My name is Bryan Winchester. I go by Braille, born and raised in Portland, Oregon. In terms of notable collaborations, I mean, I was a solo artist, also a part of the group, Lightheaded, but just kind of coming up in the independent underground hip hop scene in the late 90s, early 2000s. So kind of working with a lot of producers like Self-Titled and No from Cunning Linguists and Ninth Wonder, S1, all kinds of people that I at random times had the opportunity to work with, which was really cool.
Defines my name. You didn't know you could be the IV, did you? The solution to the social issues is you. It's me too. If you have the ability to respond, then it's your responsibility. Excuses are useless. The truth is it takes more than music to bring forth improvement to this jungle of concrete. The streets of John Blaze. The beats rotate on plates. I speak faith over the most hopeless circumstances. Advance with perseverance and stay focused. Take notice, the tape's rolling. Smile for the camera. High caliber, mark your calendar, y'all. The IV defines my name. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Yo, man, what is IV?
serving as a pastor to Saving Grace Church in Milwaukie, Oregon, a non-denominational church with a passion for the gospel, because there's no such thing as Christianity without the gospel. But most of you know him as a solo recording artist and member of Beautiful Eulogy. Braille is on the podcast this week to talk about his 10,000-hour journey, mostly through music, but ending on his current position between working on a new solo body of work that he started way back in 2013 to using his other resources to extend towards other kingdom work around the world. Catching him a few days after his 40th birthday, I am catching him with a renewed sense of purpose, validation, and drive, and now is the perfect time to connect and bring you this story. But before we do, you can support this podcast by subscribing to the YouTube page or connecting with me on Twitter at Bedroom Beat Pod. That's Bedroom BEETPOD. BedroomBeethovens.com is the easiest way to stay connected. It's got all the past shows and stuff on there. And here is the big one. Patreon.com/BedroomBeethovens. For $1 or $2, you get access to early shows. And come on, man, this is a lot of work. It just shows some appreciation and keeps the show ad-free. Nobody likes ads, right? Before you enjoy the episode, I just want to say I appreciate your time, you being here the whole nine. I do, I really do. And I hope everyone is safe and enjoying your pumpkin spice lattes or whatever fall indulgences you may have. Episode 140 with Braille. Let's go. And I want to be the first to wish you a happy 40th birthday.
Yeah, man. Official. Yeah, it's nothing feels any different. If I say it feels like validation, I'm like the season of life that I'm in, I'll take the higher numbers over the lower ones, I guess, because then it's like, okay, that justifies the bumps and bruises and the position of expounding on this or that.
I'm about to turn 40, so feeling validated is always, hey, I'll take that too. And you're, yeah, I mean, a true bedroom Beethoven. You recorded one of your first bodies of works in Ill Trip's dining room, an answer for a question that wasn't asked. And every copy you handmade was handmade by you, cassette tapes. I mean, that's a hunger you don't see in kids nowadays.
In my elementary years, I was into sports, and so watching people play basketball on TV was only minimally satisfying. I wanted to grab the ball, go outside and shoot myself. Anything that I was into, I wanted to be a participant of it. And so naturally, I kind of went through a very short stint of like listening to garage bands and stuff like that in kind of the era when Green Day and some of those bands were first getting started. I had a friend who had a guitar, tried to write a couple songs with him, realized I can't play an instrument, I can't sing, and almost like my interest started to wane. I had some experience like listening to some hip hop, but never in a sense where I felt like this is something I could do. But when I heard Tribe Called Quest, Midnight Marauders, just these guys talking about, this is our neighborhood, these are some whack MCs, this is that. I'm like, oh, they're just talking about their life. And that just resonated with me to where I was like, I think I can actually give myself to this. And so once I did, I was just trying to figure out, how can I actually do this? I don't know how to do it. I don't know where to go. So I just would look for opportunities. And if there was an opportunity, I would take it. And so there was a guy named Ill Trip. He was older. I mean, I was just probably a sophomore in high school. And he lived about an hour away from me. But, you know, he's a grown man, you know, with his own apartment and stuff. And I would take the Greyhound bus out to where he lived, and he would play some beats. He would put them on a tape for me. I would write lyrics to him, and then I'd come back. And literally in his dining room, he had a mic kind of hanging from the ceiling. I would just rap my lyrics and then go to Kinko's and take a bunch of photos and piece together an album cover and be like, okay, I got a tape. What do I do next? Put it in a record store that's local and sell 2 copies. And there used to be this thing called ATAK, ATAK. This guy P- sold just underground tapes. And I was like, well, I got an underground tape, so let me try and sell it.
And the names, man, the ninjutsu sonifers, and Ill Trip transforms into Parallel, the mental contortionist. And you are Perplex, the Celebration Bazaar, Perplex for the mind, Braille for the soul, founding mentor of the Aurora. Like, you guys were super villains in a graphic novel.
So I'm in high school, but I'm listening to a lot of these college rappers, you know, 7L and Esoteric and some of this stuff, and Jedi Mind Trick's first album. And so the use of vocabulary is really intriguing to me. And I'm learning new words because I'm a student in school. And so I'm like, oh, how does that word fit? Or how does that? And so I'm just trying to put together combinations of words that intrigue me. And really is, I think, for some reason, you know, when you're young like that, vocabulary has a way of conveying depth in your mind in and of itself. It's just like, if I use an unfamiliar word, that in itself is deep. You know, I don't think of it that way now, but when you're 14, that's kind of how you think. It's like, oh, nobody uses that word, so there's some mystery to it. And hip hop was always just so mysterious to me, because growing up in Portland, Oregon, I'm listening to these people, but as I hear their voice and I hear them over the beat, I don't imagine them in my head as just normal people. I imagine them as like, if I met them, they would just be larger than life to me, right? And so I think as a kid, I'm like trying to figure out how to convey myself in like manner. Yeah. So it's funny that you would pick up, like, because I wasn't a comic book person, but still, it's like an MC was like this mythical person. You know, you listen to, like, you know, Chub Rock, and you're like, I've never heard anybody that talks like that before. So he must not be like a normal person that I would meet walking around in the neighborhood.
There was another aspect of mystery about you at that time too. On that tape, you said you wanted to have a long conversation with your dad.
He's just such a quiet guy. So I am like, I'm very introverted like he was, but if you get me talking, I can almost talk too much, as to where with him, I would try my hardest to come up with a question that would get him to give a more long-winded answer, but you couldn't get much more out of him than like, yep, or nope, or yeah, maybe, or I don't know, you know? So I was like, man, how could I like actually intellectually engage him? And other than maybe like asking him about his, you know, VHS collection, or asking him about something that he collected where he could tell me what he has in his collection, that's like the most I could get him to give like a long-winded answer. what's cool with my dad, my parents were divorced. I just had a funny experience in the sense that my parents, both my mom and dad, they trusted me even at a young age. So it's like when, a lot of my friends, their parents weren't going to let them get on a Greyhound bus and like go to another city on their own when they were 14 and stay with a stranger and go make music. But my parents were just really easygoing. And in a sense, like, were not really raising me with any particular expectations of me. So that's maybe for better or for worse, but it's just kind of, I had free reign. And my dad, particularly by the time it got to where I was making CDs and stuff by age 17, and then I started featuring on a lot of things, every time I put out a new piece of music, he would get some construction paper and he would find colors that matched the album's artwork, and he would cut out those pieces and he'd put like a little backdrop, and then he'd put the CD in the artwork and he would put it in a frame. So it was almost like my own little awards, or like, because I never won any. So he just made it, but his living room literally became like a museum of the various albums that I had made throughout the course of my career. So whenever I made something, I'd just give him a copy and he would do something, cut out some construction paper and stuff and frame it and then put it in his living room. And so it wasn't necessarily we'd have an extended conversation about it, but there was a sense of, you could tell he was proud. And he's passed away now. He passed away in 2007. But I think even to this day, like, I can watch The Voice and watch a parent be proud of their child, and it like hits me in this like weird place where I start getting strangely emotional, because even though there wasn't like a long extended conversation about it, there was an obvious sense of like, yeah, my father's proud of what I do. And so that's like an encouraging thing that I kind of take from my relationship with him.
Out there who can relate. We're gonna share our own stories so we can work towards healing. Cause at the end of it all, life and love is all we have. Yo, sometimes I feel like a fatherless child, but I never lived a day without my father. You were there on the day I was born. I was the first one there on the day you were gone. And I can't hug a hologram, I can't shake hands with a shadow, I can't call memories up on the phone like nobody's there. I can't hear your voice, but I refuse.
So we moved after my sophomore year to New Jersey, and my mom got a job, so my mom and stepdad moved, but then my biological father followed, because I only have one brother, biological brother, who's from my father. And so my father wanted to be with his boys. So he moves cross country to be where we're at. And yeah, so and it ended up, we're living in a house, and I'm living in a house with my mom and my stepdad, and my biological father is renting a room from the same house. And But when you're on the East Coast, it's so different than being in the Northwest, because now what's an hour away from where we were in New Jersey is like Philadelphia or New York City. What used to be me taking a trip to Salem, Oregon, or Eugene, Oregon, is now me just like going all over. I mean, I didn't even end up graduating high school. So my mom and stepdad actually went bankrupt. They never really made it in New Jersey. So they moved back to Oregon during my senior year of high school. And I'm living with my biological father at that point, but we're out of the school district. The bus won't pick me up. I don't have a driver's license. His tags are expired on his car. So just the circumstances surrounding it, I basically was working at a coffee shop, and whatever money I made, I would use it to buy another Greyhound ticket to go somewhere. And if it was an extended weekend, sometimes I'd go as far as like Orlando, Florida, so it's like my backpack, I had a JanSport backpack, and I'd show up at high school and I'd have these ticket stubs and things like that of the places I had recently went. I don't know. They just kind of gave me free reign and kind of trusted that I knew what I was doing.
This high school is in Voorhees Township?
Yeah. So, because my mom gets a really good job, and my stepdad is offered a really good job as well. So we moved to New Jersey. We buy a house. After we like sign the mortgage, my stepfathers, they realized that they hired him for a job that he wasn't necessarily qualified for, and they cut his pay in half. And so we basically land in New Jersey, buy a house. And that's why my biological father ended up just staying, living with us for the remainder of the 2 years we were there, because we were in a house we couldn't afford to live in. And we're in a fairly wealthy area. So Burlington Borough is like the lowest class of a fairly higher class area of New Jersey. So we're in the bottom tier. If you lived in the actual Voorhees area or whatever, then, your father's probably a doctor or a lawyer. But I'm in Burlington Borough, and I'm showing up to school like having taken a bath with like jugs of water that we bought at the store because our water bill got turned off.
Yeah, I was the way you were describing it, I was like, man, is this the hood? Because Kelly Ripa went to Eastern High School, and I'm assuming if Kelly Ripa went to that high school, it's not the hood.
Yeah, no, it's not. That's what's funny is, but New Jersey, so I live in Oregon, which is like a huge state, right? And so to see a great change in your environment, you have to travel a further distance. But in New Jersey, you can go 30 minutes in any direction and you're in a completely different environment, And so what ended up happening is once my dad finally did move out, because my mom and stepfather went bankrupt and moved back to Oregon, he was more in the Cherry Hill area. And, it's a whole different school district and everything. That's where when I didn't have a car, a bus didn't come. So for a time, I was like walking to school like 7 miles during my senior year. Yeah, it is a suburban, well-to-do area, but I'm in a family that is like struggling to even like make ends meet.
Let's just say you're 17, you're walking to school all those miles, life first, half the battle. You're working on that. What is the mindset? If this album is successful, I'm going to stay. And if I fail, I'm going to rejoin my family in Portland.
The way I was wired, it wasn't about, I didn't care where I lived. I didn't care where I slept. I pretty much pursued creating music because I realized to like grow in it, it was going to take everything. I'm trying to like figure out how to make an album. I'm trying to figure out how to create music that is competitive with the other stuff I hear. So when we first moved to New Jersey, if you can imagine this, it's the summer after my sophomore year, and we haven't bought a house yet. So we're in temporary housing, basically staying at a hotel. So here I am, I'm a high schooler. I just moved across country. I haven't went to school yet, but I don't even live in a neighborhood. I live at a hotel. So there's no way to establish relationships with anybody my age in this place where I'm living. So the first thing I do is I try and find a studio that I can record at. And eventually I find this place near Philadelphia, and I go and record some songs. And the guy basically tells me, hey, if you want to make an album, you can record it here for free. And when it's all done, I'll help you put it out. I spent my whole junior leading up to my senior year, which is basically age 16 going into 17, working on Life First. And so every weekend, and I was going to Philly to record unless I was going somewhere else to meet with a producer. Like Self-Titled lived in New York. He did at least like half of the album. So I would go to New York, work with Self-Titled, on some stuff. And then I would go back to Philly and then record. Maybe he hadn't moved to New York. I mean, it's hard. He lived in Florida first. He was in Tampa when we started the record. Eventually he moved to New York. So, the details get fuzzy. At some point while I was on the East Coast, he was on the East Coast as well. I know that. And I was only there for like 2 years. And yeah, it wasn't like, oh, I'm going to make a bunch of money or anything like that. I wasn't thinking that way at all. I just wanted to make the best album that I could. It turns out by the time the album released, I mean, it was mixed on a digital 8-track, and sometimes my vocals were a little too quiet and stuff. So there's like old tape versions where the songs maybe sound a little bit better. But all of us involved in terms of myself and the studio where I was recording at, it's not like we had like mentors or anybody kind of teaching us what to do.
Man, if you would have went to Portland when they originally wanted you to, I guess, and before you said, hey, I'm going to stay in the East Coast and do this, when you go to Portland where your grandmother was, there's no room. So you have to go to LA. And is it one of those situations where if you would have moved back with them initially, would there have magically been room and they just felt slighted that you didn't come with them originally?
I remember my school counselor actually is who recommended that I drop out and go back to Oregon, because I think they were seeing the toll. Because it's like as high school was ending, I'm kind of looking at all these kids. They grew up together. I'd only been around for 2 years. I'm like a poor kid in a suburban school. I mean, and at that point, I'm even more poor. I mean, it was one thing when I was in the house in the suburbs, but at this point, I don't even live in the school district. They didn't kick me out of the school district, but they were recommending that I change schools. Then I'm going in the middle of my senior year to a new school where I don't know anybody. And it's like, I'm not a good student anyway. I'm walking around, with like double XL clothes and Timberland boots in the hallway of this school where like I couldn't stand out like a sore thumb any more than I did. And so as they're getting ready for prom and they're getting ready for graduation, and I'm like, man, I just don't even belong here. And I don't even know if I'm going to graduate. And eventually they're like, yeah, you should just go home. So I'm like, okay. So my brother came, and he's younger than me, but we just drove cross country from Jersey back to Portland. But yeah, I was sleeping on my grandma's couch, and I was still looking, how am I going to create music? So I met this guy, Johnny Five, who lived in the LA area. And he's like, come create music over here. And so I hitched a bus. I went there, and I just started sleeping in a basement in LA, making music with him.
And you spent about a year there.
It was such a funny situation, man. I mean, to even recall it, like there was basically, he had friends who were in a band, and they had a detached garage from one of the bandmates' parents' home that they built a studio in. And so we would be recording there, but I was actually sleeping in that detached garage, but the family who owned the home didn't know that I was sleeping in that detached garage. So actually, like the first time, I remember that I show up to LA, we're recording, and then we're staying up late working on music, and the family comes and knocks on the door and is like, hey, it's getting late, you guys should go home. And I'm thinking to myself, I thought this was where I was going to be sleeping, so we sleep literally, it's so late, we can't go back to my friend's house. So we literally sleep on like on a park bench thing situation. But eventually I end up sleeping in that garage. I just wait until it's so late that the families went to bed, and then I go down the driveway and go in the studio and sleep, and then I couldn't leave the studio until my friend arrived, because then it would seem like I arrived with him. So I'd just be sitting there up in this attic of this detached garage, like waiting for him to show up. I would stay there for as long as I could tolerate it. And eventually I'd call my mom on some, I didn't even have a cell phone. So I would call my mom just like on somebody's phone or a pay phone and be like, Mom, can you get me a Greyhound ticket to come back home? Because I need to take a break from this situation, but then like I had no momentum in Portland. So I'd go back to LA.
So at that point, how hard is it to convince your significant other at the time to stop cleaning out where repossessed homes? Let's quit that. Let's move out of our place. Let's put all our stuff in storage. Let's live in a van. Let's tour the country. Oh, and every time we play a show, it's going to be free.
I'm trying to get some sense of normalcy with life, because I've just been like floating. I've got these like desires. Like I really desire to do whatever is right as best as I can understand what that is. But I'm just such a bummy, scrappy kid. And I'm pretty much content in any situation you put me in, because I'm just used to it at this point. I did a show in Salem, Oregon. I'm from the Portland area. And, we would often crash at people's houses because we couldn't afford hotels, back then. I mean, I'm not making any money doing music at all. It's not, I take it like it's my college years. I'm like, some people, they go into debt to get their degree in whatever their future career is going to be. I'm like, this is my college years. I'm not going to go into debt But if I don't make any money, that's okay. Actually coming out at the end of it with no debt would probably be better than, I just barely made it by the skin of my teeth. We would just go from city to city and sell CDs and t-shirts, and that would pay for the gas. And I'm kind of trying to manage the money, but I don't know what I'm doing, So I'm like, okay, we're going to go to McDonald's and everybody gets $3 for the dollar menu, and that's what we would do for lunch. And so I'm kind of like trying to manage this money to make sure we have enough gas to get to the next city, and then we can eat some food. And so it's almost like what they would call a per diem on like a larger tour, but it's like our per diem is like $4 a piece, So it's not like I'm trying to convince anybody to do anything. It's more just like, hey, let's do this. I'm like zealous to take advantage of opportunities. Cause again, I take it like this is the college era of my music career. And this is the only way that I'm going to learn how to do these things is by actually doing it.
The free thing is still kind of where I get tripped up. Like your daughter's born and there's some complications with her. And because you're a rapper, there's no health insurance and you have to have surgery for a hernia yourself. And there is this divorce before you meet your current wife, who's very lovely, by the way. And through all the debt, bills, stress, you're on tour sleeping on couches with your daughter and you release Native Lungs, which could have alleviated some of those bills and that stress, but you still release it for free.
Yeah. Now we're like meshing together here, multiple eras, right? So to give a snapshot, so music eventually does become a career for me. Like a viable career by about 2003. When in 2004, I put out Shades of Grey, and it was a fairly successful independent record, especially coming from my background of like, I never have any money. All of a sudden I released it and it gets covered in like The Source and a couple other magazines. And so this is kind of the first time since Life First, because I did like some offshoot projects and kind of, as you alluded to, I did a lot of projects that just never saw the light of day. Part of it was because I'm a perfectionist, but part of it also was just the circumstances. It would just be too complicated to actually finish it because files are on this computer or this, format. And then I don't have access to another studio in that same format. And so it's like the songs just kind of get lost. But music does become a career leading up to 2006 when my daughter is born. And by 2006, I'm touring as the opening act for James Brown. I've started my own record label. I'm doing all this stuff. And my daughter is born though, and I have no insurance and there is complications with the birth. And so all of a sudden I've just got massive hospital bills and I'm trying to figure out what to do with them. So she's born November 12th, 2006. And then James Brown ends up passing away Christmas 2006. And so a large part of my thing was I was his opening act. And, I had only been doing that for a while, but I'd done about 25 shows. And that was like a good gig for me to have because it's much larger shows than what I would do on my own. And plus I would sell merch and stuff. So it's kind of like daughter's born, bunch of bills, James Brown passes away. And then going to 2007, my father passes away by July. And then we enter into the recession. And so we eventually have to sell our home, which we had bought when money was coming in, and we were staying back in an apartment. And I released the IV edition around that time. So I was releasing an album and trying to sell it and do all that stuff and still do licensing deals. But the music, the cost of like what people were willing to pay had just dropped dramatically between 2004 to 2008. So I'm just trying to figure it out.
I'm not trained in the art of war. I'm not running wild chasing beef like a carnivore. Sometimes I feel like giving up. Sometimes I feel like it's not worth the fight. Sometimes I feel like nobody cares. Cried at night and realized God was right there. So regardless of what's seen with physical eyes, deep inside, I know there's meaning to life. And even when I'm feeling down, defiled, defeated and dry, I can still lift my hands.
If you remember when Radiohead did the In Rainbows record, I think, and they did this like name your own price thing. And that really resonated with me because every time I did distribution deals, it's like there would be all these issues, like if they got reserve stock and, things get shipped and then, it's like cutting out the profits and stuff. And I'm like, man, I don't have enough marketing behind me to play this distribution game. and, paying for like, end caps in record shops and stuff like that. And it's like, I don't have enough marketing behind me to do that. So when we get into 2009, I make an album, Cloud 19 with S1. And I was like, let me try this whole like name your own price thing. So we would go do shows and I'll just put a hat on the table and I'll just lay out the CDs and say, everybody can take one and just pay what you can. And given the cost of manufacturing CDs at that time, whether somebody was putting down $5 or somebody's like, man, I'm a big time supporter, here's $20, or somebody puts down $1, we were walking away. That was the better way to get more copies of the album in more people's hands. And so, Cloud 19, we were able to get out like 15,000 units in a time when it was really hard to slang CDs because we were entering a transition point. So that's kind of what was the press, the thing that got me thinking about free music was a combination of Radiohead and then some of the distribution issues that I would see from an indie artist. So I was just trying to find creative solutions to get the music to more people's hands and then to broaden the support base.
You said you were opening act for James Brown. Now, James Brown is a legend. He is an icon, but you're also a God-fearing man. And you're performing with a guy who tried to murder his musical rival at 16. He was married 4 times. He had 10 kids. There's domestic violent arrests. There's rape accusations. There's theft convictions. There's PCP and cocaine drug use. I guess you can kind of see where I'm going with this. Do you weigh the pros and cons of joining the stage with someone like that? Kind of consider the implications of how maybe people might view you based off that.
Honestly, I didn't necessarily have this thinking where, especially in that era, and kind of given the various producers I was working with and stuff like that, it's not like it was like, oh, somebody has to think like me, believe like me, be like me in order for us to work on music. But even in terms of James Brown, I didn't know all those stories, which I know now. The way that whole thing came about. So I'm living in Portland. This is after the Shades of Grey era when that whole thing started. And I'm like, man, I'm just trying to learn how to be more professional. Cause part of when you're hearing these stories is like, I just don't know what I'm doing. I grew up in Portland, Oregon. There was no music industry that I had access to. There was nobody that I was learning from. I didn't know even artists who like had toured, who had done things internationally. And not to say that I'm necessarily a pioneer. I think some would see me as a pioneer in Portland, but there's other groups like the Lifesavers. And I put up this Pure Volume page, which was kind of like a MySpace, but for musicians. And Pure Volume randomly features me on the front page. And within that, somebody in the management office of James Brown discovers my music and invites me to come out just because they want to meet me. I got no idea what this is. I mean, I fly to New York and they want me to perform in their office. So I bring a DJ with me and we're in this building. So I show up in New York. I take a taxi and I end up in this it was not an economy taxi. And so this guy, it's more of a fancy car or whatever. And I thought they were all the same. I thought I just flagged down anything. It's going to be the same price. And so we pull up to their offices and it was called Intrigue Music Management. We pull up to their offices and he tells me the total and I'm looking at my DJ and neither of us have enough money. So I got to call these people who are not even my manager yet and say, hey, I can't afford to pay for the car that just brought me to come and perform at your office. So then they pay for the car. And this is like, they're above Martha Stewart's office. And I show up and there's this Jewish guy. His name's Frank, Super Frank. And he's James Brown's manager. And so I'm performing for him and like 10 or 12 people in the office. So we're talking and he says, yeah, how would you like to open for Mr. Brown? And, I knew that they managed Mr. Brown, but I did not think that was what this conversation was about at all. So there's nothing in my mind is like, oh yeah, I'm this underground rapper from Portland, Oregon, and this guy's going to ask me to open for James Brown. That doesn't even register. So by the time he does ask me, my first show was at the BB King Blues Grill in Times Square, New York. I'm not thinking who's James Brown, what's his I mean, it's like, all I know is like, this is the godfather of soul. Why am I opening for this dude? But what's funny is, and this is where the fit happens from their mind, which is what's so strange. They need an opening act for James Brown. Okay. Bands became not an option because it was too expensive to travel with the, more musicians. But not only that, once James Brown had the stage set with his band stuff, he didn't want it touched. He didn't want the mix getting touched. He didn't want the instruments getting touched. And so a band opening wasn't really a good option. Well, also, even though James kind of has this like shady past, he has rules. You can't open for him and step on stage in blue jeans, because in his mind, that's unprofessional. He also doesn't want someone stepping on stage and cursing at his audience because he feels like it's unprofessional. So that's really the category. So my kind of being a God-fearing guy who like doesn't cuss in his lyrics and stuff, that's why I end up being a good fit, because I can open as a solo act. And I'm not going to apparently like offend his audience or do something that's unprofessional. So they're like, yeah, you can't cuss and you can't wear blue jeans. I'm like, I think I can do that, And so that's how I fit into the picture in just the strangest way. And, so I remember being backstage before the first show, and I'm like, what is going on? This is like for his 75th birthday. We're Times Square, New York, BB King Blues Grill. I'm backstage by myself. I'm like talking to the security guard because I'm trying to talk myself from not jumping off the cliff. It's just like, I don't even know if I should go on that stage and perform, And so I'm like, got this nervous energy just talking to a security guard. And, but I just go out and perform, and then they're like, hey, that worked well. We're going to invite you out to another show, this time in Barcelona, Spain, So I'm just like, all right. And the same attitude that I had from the beginning of like, okay, just tell me what I got to do and I'll figure out what it takes.
So you're touring. You've toured for 15, 16 years straight. You said that you adored 3 years of additional touring, even though it taxed your body physically. Why did you feel the timing wasn't right to quit when you originally wanted to? And were the benefits of pushing through an additional 3 years worth it?
The seed of the divorce started in 2009. That's its own story. But 2010, it's kind of official. I put out Weapon Aid, and just in God's kindness. I mean, I'm a single father. I got a 3-year-old girl. I'm just taking care of her full time. Once the divorce happened, I was just completely on my own, filed bankruptcy, and kind of stopped trying to maintain the music career. And I basically was just doing the bare minimum to pay for a 1-bedroom apartment, because I felt like so many people in my daughter's life kind of abandoned her simultaneously that I was just like, I'm not going to drop her off at a babysitter. Right. So I'm just going to take care of her full time. And so I would only do like 1 or 2 shows a month, and she would come with me, and she would just sit on stage with her pacifier. And that was a short stint. But eventually another lady came into my life and into my daughter's life, and we got married. And so I'm making Native Lungs, and I'm like, okay, now I'm taking care of a family all over again. I'm like, I kind of know how to do this. So I'm like, I'll make an album, I'll book some shows. But it quickly just became like, dude, I can't repeat doing everything the same way. Like, I had just changed so much. And I'm going out, I'm doing shows for Native Lungs, and I get a hernia. At first, I didn't know what it was. So I thought I had stomach ulcers or something. It's just like I would bend over and kind of like, it's like my body would want to like fold like an accordion. And so I'd just be walking like hunched over, but I don't know what's wrong. So I'm like drinking cabbage juice. I'm trying to take care of an ulcer. But eventually my intestine drops into my testicle. And then I'm like, oh, that's what it is. So it's an inguinal hernia, but I already got all these shows booked. And so I'm like, I can't just cancel these shows. So I'm doing this tour all by myself. I don't even have a DJ traveling with me. I'm just like flying out to various cities in the US, doing these shows, enough adrenaline to like get through the show, but then to stand and talk with people and everything. I'm like, dude, I don't think I want to continue having my livelihood depend on this. This is just too much. So I kind of want to retire after Native Lungs. And I'm like, I think I've given it what I have to give it, but I'm just too different. So it has to look different. And so I end up having some close friends. We form Beautiful Eulogy. And really, I'm trying to transition to like give myself to something else, but I don't know what that is yet. And so it's literally like the only career I know is music. So Beautiful Eulogy becomes a vehicle where at least I'm not traveling by myself. And it's almost like I can reinvent myself within the context of a group. So I don't feel like all the baggage of being Braille is like just hovering over me. I can just enjoy this new season of life. And that's really what touring became for me. Less of, oh, I can't wait to get out on the road. Nah, I kind of became more of a homebody. It was like, let me get on the road so that I can have a little cushion. Therefore, I can then pursue things that I want to do in the future.
I think it's pretty cool because, you know, obviously with your sermons, you're inspiring people every day. And then I read stuff about your music, like that guy paralyzed from the waist down in Africa who wrote you that letter saying that, you know, thanking you for the music that you make. I just think everything that you've kind of touched, it's always going to inspire people. And even as recent as January of this year, you said it was difficult to regain momentum when your equipment crashes and your ministry becomes more demanding. So I'm hoping you're finding your footing and it's a little easier to balance the two.
Yeah, I mean, really, like the ministry is what I'm pouring my life into. And like with Beautiful, so I was a believer. Part of my story, like I wasn't raised in like a Christian home or anything like that, but I heard the gospel message. Like when I was 14, I was gripped by it, but I had no like mentorship or training or anything. I didn't even know how to read the Bible. I didn't grow up reading the Bible. And, I could say I didn't know how to read the Bible. Well, don't you just pick it up and read it? Well, yeah, but I couldn't make sense of it. I didn't know like what are the various genres of literature in there? What's the context? I just didn't understand that stuff. I had enough. I understood the faith enough that it like was holding me together even when other things fell apart, but I didn't know how to really articulate it and things like that. So after I went through the divorce, I was kind of like, man, it was just such an unexpected thing. It's like either I could fall away from the Lord or I could just cling to him more tightly. And I cling to him more tightly. And in that, it's like God brought people into my life that actually like taught me how to read and understand the scriptures better. And it's like all these pieces of the puzzle, they were all on the table. So like it's like you have all these pieces of the puzzle on the table, but they're not connected to one another. And all of a sudden pieces start clicking. So when I was doing the Native Lungs tour, even though I was like injured, I'm talking with people. And as I'm just expressing the things that I'm learning, I'm seeing how excited they're getting. I'm seeing how encouraged they are. I'm preaching the gospel, and people at concerts are telling me like, man, I haven't heard the gospel clearly articulated in such a long time. And I'm thinking, but you're in a church. Why are you not hearing the gospel clearly articulated? And what that did in me is it didn't make me want to be on tour, doing songs. It made me want to figure out what is pastoral ministry, because I feel like I floundered for so long in my life because I never had somebody who came alongside me and like helped me understand the things that I didn't understand. And so all of a sudden it was just like, man, my sympathy for people who are like trying to get their feet under them, but can't, like, there was just a depth of sympathy that I said, rather than despising people because they're ignorant to something or they don't understand something, what does it look like to, in gentleness and in kindness, come alongside them and help them to understand and help them to process? And so that's kind of what stirred in me, was like, I want to learn this well enough so that I can pass it on to others. And so while we're doing Beautiful Eulogy, I'm just trying to learn my faith well enough, learn the Christian faith well enough that I can hand it off to others so that they can benefit from it in the ways that in God's kindness, I've benefited from it. Between being a husband and now being a father of 3 kids, it's like, I can't give myself to music and learning how to be a pastor at the same time. So it's kind of almost like I'm in college once again, right? But now I'm in college of like how to be a pastor, and because I want to do it faithfully and I want to do it well. And so I just didn't have the bandwidth really for music once I started, but I'm trying to find room. I feel like there's still a part of me that it's like I have a voice. I want to learn how to use my voice again in a more developed sense. And I desire to make music, but it's just like when you used to put like every waking hour into creating music and now you're just trying to do it on the side, how can you gain momentum? You know, and that's the thing I wrestle with. It's like, it's just hard to gain momentum now.
When you were 14 years old, what did this street preacher on a basketball court say to you that captured you?
See, I'm at this place, it's called the Lentz Boys and Girls Club. And I'm there, I'm wearing probably size 40 pants. The hilarious thing is it's like, I'm looking at, because this is before I lived in the East Coast. So I'm inspired by the East Coast, but I'd never been there at that point. So I'm wearing these huge pants, my Timberland boots, you know, I'm wearing like Echo and Fubu when they're like new brands. And this dude sees me and, you know, he can tell I'm a hip hop head. Because it's just like the writing's on the wall. I can't even play basketball because I only got one pair of shoes per year. It's at tax time. So instead of getting Jordans, you know, when my dad got his tax refund, now I'm getting Timberlands, you know. So it's like the tongues of the boots are like flopping around. So it's just like I'm not even trying to play basketball. So I'm just awkwardly walking around. And this guy's like, oh, you know, finally I've got a connection with somebody who understands kind of the hip hop I'm into. So we sit down on the bleachers and I've got raps folded up in my pocket and I read one to him. And he asked me if my family goes to church. I'm like, no, I'd only been into a church building once and it was for my friend's mom's funeral. So it's like, I'm so unchurched that I've never even played at church. I never went to church for holidays. I mean, I have no recollection of going to churches. So he's asking me questions about that. But there was this point with my stepfather. I had some curiosities. We were throwing a football back and forth, and I asked him, if God created everything, who created God? And then I threw him the football. He caught it. He looked at me. He said, I don't know. And he threw it back to me. You know, so in a similar way, like you picked up on the conversation with my father, you know, I never had a very developed relationship with my stepfather, and my mom and stepdad ended up getting divorced as well. But it's like I wanted to have deep conversations, but I wasn't surrounded with people that would engage me in them. So they just lived in my head. So it's like somebody's willing to engage me on this conversation and they're like, yes, there is a God. And I'm like, I believe there's a God, you know, and it's like, you're accountable to him. Like he made you and you're accountable to him. And I'm like, I believe I'm accountable to him. And it's like, and he sent his son, Jesus, who died on the cross so that your sins can be forgiven and you can be reconciled into your relationship with him. And I'm like, I know what it's like, how relationships can be damaged when people do things that are wrong and stuff. I want a right relationship with God. And so it's like, I understood God created me. I'm accountable to him, that I'm a sinner. And like, I can't stand before God and say, look how good I am. I need grace. I need a covering that I can't provide for myself. And he provided it for me in Jesus Christ. And that's like all I knew, man. I just knew God sees me and through his son, he can save me. And it's like, it's just been confirmed with time that it really was a work of God in my heart, because I didn't know anything else. I didn't understand like the Christian faith very well. But I understood enough to say like, God has done something in me. And I'm not going to pretend like it hasn't happened. And so I've just trusted him and I've desired to obey him as best as I understood how to since that time. You can look up Saving Grace Church. We're in Milwaukie, Oregon, and you can find some of the sermons. But in terms of music, I started working on a solo album called Banquet for the Broken in 2013. And I just dabble on it as I go. I haven't really released any songs that are related to it. Every now and then I release random songs just because I'm like, I finished something. It's not for Banquet for the Broken. I might as well release it. But Banquet for the Broken is a record that I'm kind of nursing, and I don't feel any pressure to put it out prematurely because my livelihood doesn't depend on it. And I don't feel any pressure to try and like keep up this impression of who I am or who I'm not. And so I'm just kind of working on it until I feel like I have something that's worth like releasing into the world. And honestly, like now hitting age 40, I'm getting to the point where I'm like, if I don't complete this, you know, sometime soon, I'm going to get to a point where I'm so detached from it. Like I still feel like even though I don't rap often, I'm not so far away from it that it's like I can't do it. It's still in me. So yeah, I'm going to be trying to make an album over the next year. I've got a Patreon page that kind of updates people on the process of that. And you can find me on social media, Bryan Braille, Bryan Braille.
I'm glad we could have a conversation, man. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, man. I mean, I really appreciate you reaching out. This is like a lot of fun because in most of my world, it's so detached from my past in music that it's like there's not even a reference point that I can bounce off of to even start a conversation to try and even like say, oh yeah, this or that. So unless I run into one of my friends from back in the day. So this was like it was a treat for me to just get to talk about some stories that I don't get to talk about that often. So thank you for, out of all the many artists that you reach out to, for taking time to reach out.